The shift in Xbox's strategy has been taking up so much of the limelight as of late that people haven't really been paying too much attention to what's been going on with the Sony side of the fence, and they really should, because there could be some pretty serious implications for their AAA first-party games moving forward as a result. Now, some financials for Sony have just come out, and ultimately they're pretty disappointed with what they're seeing. Everything across the board indicates that their operating margins should be going up. They'd like to see themselves at about 20% right now, but unfortunately that just hasn't been happening. Despite the fact that they're killing it with first-party game sales, digital distribution of titles on their platform, digital add-on content that's being sold, plus the subscription plan with PS Plus and the various tiers that it has, for some reason they've been seeing their overall operating margins going down and down and down. In the first quarter of 2022, their overall operating margin was somewhere between 12 and 13%. December, later that year, it was hovering at just over 9%, and now, 1 year after that, in December of 2023, it was sitting at just below 6%. And Sony are just sitting there looking at this like, this is baffling. We're doing something wrong. The business side of things needs to be better. Because when everything else is doing so well and is actually at record highs for your company, you should be seeing those operating margins go up, not down. The question is, how are they going to turn this ship around? How are they going to get to see that operating margin go up? What sort of changes are going to have to be implemented? And what's been causing this in the first place? Well, the answer actually lies with something that Sony have been saying for a really, really long time publicly, which is the cost of producing these single-player AAA games is just unsustainable. It costs more and more money with each and every passing year in order to get these things made. And at some point, something has to give. And what kind of money are we talking about here? Well, let's see. God of War Ragnarok allegedly cost somewhere around $200 million to produce. Horizon Forbidden West, The Last of Us Part 2, each of those cost somewhere in the neighborhood of $220 million a piece to produce. And Spider-Man 2, which just came out this past fall, made by Insomniac Games, which has a lot of games that they have in development right now, that game allegedly cost $300 million to produce, which is absolutely insane. Just for some comparison, some of the best-selling games of 2023, Hogwarts Legacy, that costs $150 million to produce, and Baldur's Gate 3, which almost across the board stole all of the Game of the Year awards last year, $100 million to produce. So yeah, Sony's looking at this and saying, we're doing something wrong, something has to be better. And by doing things better, they mean, how are we going to make more money? How are we going to recoup our money here? Like, we're already doing so well in everything else, so that's not the problem. The problem has to be with how these games are being made and how we're monetizing these games. They have tried to convince everyone with the start of the PlayStation 5 generation that because the cost of video games is unsustainable, they had to raise the price to $70. Now we're seeing that despite the increase, despite the microtransactions, despite all the other things that they're trying to get revenue from, they're still seeing the bloat expand and expand and expand. Maybe we should be questioning why we're being charged $70 for video games at this point in the first place. So I think the first thing that we're going to see from them moving forward is that their live service games, they're going to be extremely bullish about putting them day and date on both the PS5 and the PC. They have been very reluctant to do this in the past with a lot of their games, right? God of War 2018, it took a couple of years for that to come to the PC. Same thing with Horizon Zero Dawn. They have been putting games like that out on PS5 first and then releasing them on PC at a later date. But with Helldivers 2, that is a massive success story. Because they've put that out on both platforms at the same time, they're realizing, oh, if we do both at the same time, we're not actually going to cannibalize our sales? No, of course you're not. The people who are buying it on PlayStation were always going to buy it on PlayStation. The people who are buying those games on the PC, they were never going to buy it on a PlayStation. So all you're doing is maximizing the reach that your game has on day one and maximizing those early profits. Like the fact that Sony was so hesitant to move in this direction before has always left me scratching my head. And I'm sure a game like Helldivers 2 is going to be successful for a really long time because it's only $40 instead of $70. Nobody likes that $70 price point, right? But also, the monetization that they have in the game, at least at this point, it doesn't seem like it's overly aggressive at all, which makes people feel like, yeah, this is a game that I want to get into and support, because you're not like trying to like steal money from me every time I turn around. So yeah, I would expect to see a lot of that with their games as a service titles moving forward. The real question is, what are they going to do with their first party AAA exclusives that are single player, and are we going to notice those changes? And that's the big question, because Sony have a tightrope to walk now, right? Like, these games are getting more and more expensive to produce, sure, but number one, they're going to have to look at the schedules of these games, and they're going to be like, look, we can't have delay after delay after delay. If you have a timetable for a game, you have to stick with it as best you can, because if a game's supposed to be delivered here, but we have to extend development time again and again and again, like, there's potentially hundreds of people that are working on a game that you have to continue to pay to extend this project timeline out. And it is just a massive, massive expense each and every time that you have to do that. So I've already seen them call out Bungie for this, but I'm sure this is going to apply to other studios as well. Because, I mean, come on, Insomniac Games, $300 million for Spider-Man 2. They're going to clamp down with those studios as well. And they're going to be like, look, you have to do something to rein it in. But I'm sure that they're going to be looking at more than just keeping leadership accountable. They're probably going to be looking at, do we really need to have the level of fidelity in our games that we think we do? And that's something that they have to look at very, very closely, because they have a pedigree at this point. People prefer Sony. Well, I mean, they actually have games, for one. Look, I'm an Xbox fan, but as far as their first party releases have been concerned, Sony has been blowing them out of the water for generations at this point. So there's no point in even making a comparison there. But still, Sony have earned the pedigree for making the style and the types of games that they do, because they are top notch across the board. They have games that release usually fairly bug-free. I mean, they might have some bugs, but nothing that's going to ruin your experience for the most part, right? The visual fidelity is absolutely top-notch each and every time. I mean, The Last of Us Part 2, which came out on the PS4 to start, by the way. I'm not even talking about the PS5 remaster that just came out in January. Like, from a visual fidelity perspective, nothing has come close to it, because every character, every location, down to the last inch, to the last centimeter, to the last millimeter, is so highly detailed that it just blows me away each and every single time. Little details throughout the entire environment. Like, when I'm crawling through the grass, when I'm brushing against a bush, I can see each and every individual blade of grass move in a realistic way. I can see the leaves individually move in a realistic way as I brush past them. You don't see that level of detail in a lot of games. Now, for me, I enjoy seeing that kind of stuff because it is so few and far between, right? Certain games, they might have tall grass, but it's just static. It doesn't move with the character, right? It's just there to provide the illusion, to say to you while you're playing the game, that visual feedback is saying, yeah, you're covered and the enemies aren't going to see you here. Other games might have like a visual animation where like the grass like just kind of like moves around the character, but not in a realistic way, but just enough to be like, yeah, something is happening here, but not in The Last of Us Part 2, man. They really went all out for that game. And while I love seeing that kind of detail in a game and its environments, because it really does make for a much more immersive experience, and not to mention, it also helps in making the entire game completely immersive from beginning to end, because if you have basically the same visual fidelity during gameplay as you do during the cinematics of that game, the player is never going to be pulled out of that experience. So I appreciate the fact that they spend that kind of money on their games. However, if Sony are looking at games like that now and they're being like, well, there are certain things that we don't have to spend that kind of time and money on, right? Like, maybe every individual leaf on a bush doesn't have to be programmed that way, right? I'm not saying that every leaf is programmed that way, but you know what I'm saying, right? You know what point I'm getting to? There are certain things along the way in development that they're probably going to say, you know what, you could cut some corners here and our games will still look amazing. So do something about that, devs, because we can't keep spending $200, $220 million, $250, $300 million on a game, because that doesn't even include the marketing costs. But if they inadvertently veer too far in the opposite direction that they've been going, players on the PlayStation ecosystem are going to look at these titles coming out and being like, what happened? I bought this system because I want to play more games like Ghost of Tsushima, because I want to play more God of War and Horizon and all these other kinds of exclusives that they've had. And now the games are seemingly scaling back from that cinematic experience that I've enjoyed so very much. So what gives? And if players start feeling that way and they're feeling extremely resentful, then that's going to end up being an even bigger problem for Sony. So I'm assuming that they're going to try and stay true to the heart of what they've been delivering with their first party games moving forward, but we might not be seeing the same kind of innovation moving forward that we've seen in their games. Because yeah, while it's great that I can look at a game from the PlayStation 4 in 2024 and be like, wow, this still looks like one of the most amazing visual fidelity experiences I've ever had the pleasure of playing in my life. While that's great, maybe they don't need to be on such a cutting edge. That said, though, this generation really hasn't been the best for Sony overall anyway, right? They've put out a lot of great games already, sure, but we're looking at a lot of sequels and a lot of remasters or remakes, and we haven't really seen anything new come out this generation from an IP perspective. And I would like to see new IPs from them, stuff that doesn't always have to be cinematic. Like, they can put out a game that's just fun to play. Like Helldivers 2 is a great experience, right? Everyone's raving about it, how fun it is. It's just pure gameplay for the most part, and people adore it for that very reason. But does that kind of game always have to be a live service sort of a game, or can they actually do that for some of their AAA first-party experiences? Like, why can't we have more games produced for first-party Sony, like Earth Defense Force, right? Like, that would be pretty amazing. And by the way, if you are one of the many fans of Helldivers 2, you owe it to yourself to play the Earth Defense Force games, because if you like just shooting at hordes and hordes of bugs that are coming at you at the same time, those are games that you need to check out, and you've been doing yourself a disservice by not checking them out. But I don't want them to like make that every single game that they make moving forward, right? I don't need every game to completely cut back all the cinematics and everything. I understand that that's a big part of the expense, because you want the same sort of visual fidelity in game as you do with the cinematics and everything like that. But like, to a certain extent, I feel like their games have been relying on the cinematics way too much. I know there are a lot of people out there who love those games. I mean, I've enjoyed them too, as I said, but they've enjoyed those games and they don't want anything to change. But, you know, God of War Ragnarok, I was playing that game, and to a certain extent, it's like the first several hours of that campaign, it's like, here's a little bit of gameplay, but here's a whole bunch of cinematics. Here's a little more gameplay and a whole lot more cinematics. Oh, hey, we're not going to let you play just yet, but here's an on-rails moment, and we'll allow you to move the camera around. And it was very frustrating. Eventually, the game did open up and allowed me to just take control, but they do need to reel that back in a little bit more, and maybe that'll help with some of the expenses. I don't know. I'm not a developer. I don't work in the business, so I can't really say for certain, but I'd be okay with them leaning more into gameplay and a little less into the cinematics moving forward. So all I'm going to say to wrap up this video at this point is that everyone should keep a very keen eye on PlayStation exclusives moving forward. And let's see if the quality of their first party AAA output changes, and if it's for the better or if it's for the worse, or if we notice no change whatsoever. Either way, this is worth paying attention to and keeping a keen eye on, and I'll be updating all of you if there's more that comes out in the not too distant future. So until then, for now at least anyway, on this channel, if you like this content and you like hearing about stuff that's happening in the video game industry, be sure to like the video, to subscribe so you know when future content is coming out, and also please be aware that I am on Twitch every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and I am often talking about all this kind of stuff on my streams as well, while I'm playing a whole bunch of different games. So, until then, everyone, whether I see you on Twitch or on the next YouTube video, take care of yourselves.